Hello and welcome back to Gaming Gaiden. In this installment, I want to talk about something that I found rather interesting and I wouldn't have known if I hadn't started to open my NES games to clean them up and, remove dust and dirt and things like that. So, Famicom games. Famicom games came in a variety of shapes, colors, sizes, and another thing, they came by different manufacturers. What's different about the Famicom games to the NES games is that the company that would make the Famicom game itself, wrote the code for it, would then go and produce the cartridge and the PCB itself. So if you had a Nintendo game, like Mario 3 here, this was written by Nintendo programmers and it was produced by Nintendo. If you had a game by Capcom, such as Rockman 5 here, this would be manufactured by Capcom. It wouldn't be manufactured by Nintendo. Namco game. Here is Digital Devil Story Shin Megami Tensei. This game produced by Namco, not by Capcom or Nintendo. Akamajo Densetsu. Konami made this, so that's produced by Konami. Here is Spelunker. Irem made it. And here's a Namco game. Here's Wagon Land 2. So, yeah, there's just some examples of games that are completely different. However, on the NES, all games, no matter who made them, were produced by Nintendo. Nintendo would make these games, and that's why all NES games are all the same gray shell. If you open up like a game, here's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, which is made by Ultra, which is another name for Konami, because, reasons anyway. I won't go into that in this video. If you open it up, here is the board. It is a common MMC3. This is a TL-ROM board. This board here has the two mask ROM chips, has its mapper, the MMC3, the ROM and care, and then has the NES 10 lockout chip. And this is a Nintendo board, even though it's a Konami game. Now, this is very obvious, because, anyone who knows anything about NES games probably already knows this bit of information. But what is a bit odd, and what I didn't learn until I started to open up my NES games, is that there is a slight distinction between what Nintendo was doing and what Konami was doing. Konami had their games in the Unrom board set, which is a very common, just simple mapper. And Nintendo had their games in the Unrom board set. Now, what's interesting is some, but not all, of Konami's Unrom boards are actually manufactured by Konami and not Nintendo. This blew my mind because this contradicts everything that I know about NES game board types, because no other company produced NES boards, or at least licensed boards. You have your Tengens and your Epic Americas and games like that, but as far as licensed games, they were all made by Nintendo, and that's why, there was this bottleneck, and, where games would be, the third-party companies would order games, Nintendo would say, like, yeah, okay, we'll produce, like, 10,000 copies of it, and when they sell out, it'll be 3 months until we produce new versions, and if the third parties, that's just tough. You just have to deal with it. However, Konami, I guess, they were such a huge company, or whatever, they singly, as far as I know, this never happened to any other NES developer, they singly produced their own boards for their games. So here's a comparison. Here's Kid Cool here, which is not a very good game, but it's an Unrom board. I've took out the screws on it. This is a Unrom board. It has the PRG, it has the mapper, has lockout chip, and it has an 8K SRAM. So that is what a Nintendo produced Unrom board looks like. UN-ROM, Unrom. Now, let's take a look at a Konami Unrom board. Here's Silent Service. Take off its back. And immediately you'll notice that this PCB is quite a bit different. For one thing, it has all the exact same components, but the mask ROM is positioned in a vertical position as opposed to the more horizontal shapes of the Nintendo-produced boards. The PCB itself is a different shade of green, and it's another thing about it is that it says, you know, if I can see if that will show up, it says 1986 Nintendo, but it has no markings of Konami. However, let's put that back in. That again is Silent Service. Let's take a look at another copy of Silent Service. So let's open this one up, take up its back, and this one, again, you'll notice this one is blue, and this one is green. This one doesn't say anything on it, but this one shows up very clearly, Konami. So Konami branded their own PCB, though they produced it, so there's no question about this, that this is different from the Nintendo-produced Unrom. These are both exactly the same board type, you know, they're capable of exactly the same thing, but this one's made by Konami, and this one's made by Nintendo. And it's interesting because this one, although it's not labeled it's made by Konami, it very clearly is the exact same board and exactly the same position and everything. The PCB is just a different color. So that's kind of interesting. Finally, I have one more Unrom board here, and that's Double Dribble. So let's open this one up. And again, you can see this one is a green one, and this one has the Konami Konami logo embossed right on it, just like this light blue one does. And you'll notice that there is a variant in the 8K SRAM. This one here uses a very narrow 8K SRAM, and this one uses the traditional fat one. I don't know what's up with that. You know, it's just a weird variance, I guess. Anyway, there's that's how Unrom is presented by Konami, but this was actually the only board type that they did this with. More interesting than that is, again, going back to the common MMC3 boards, which is the TL-ROM. This one is a Konami board, but this one's made by Nintendo. So let's open this up and take a look at this again. Put that down. So once again, that is what a Nintendo Unrom board, or a Nintendo TL-ROM board looks like, which is your common MMC3s, the most common abundant mapper there is on the NES. So here you have your MMC3, you have your CARE, or you have your PRG, you have here you have your CARE, and then you have your NES 10 lockout chip. So that is a Konami game, but it's manufactured by Nintendo. Now, let's take a look at another Konami game, Mission Impossible here, which is made by Ultra, which is Konami again, this, so same company. But this one uses Konami's own version of the TL-ROM board. Take a look at this. So immediately you'll notice that this board is completely square, it's rectangular, as opposed to the more L-shaped PCB of the Nintendo version. The mapper is just square in the middle of the board, and it's kind of got a nice symmetrical design to it. Also, in addition to that, I don't know if my camera will be able to pick this up, but if you look at the mask-ROMs themselves, they actually are labeled Konami. So in addition to manufacturing the PCB, making the game, they actually printed their own mask-ROMs. They didn't get a company, you know, like AT&T or whatever other company produced mask-ROMs. You know, you always see various company logos, like third-party companies that were producing the mask-ROMs back in the 80s, but, you know, when there was the ROM shortage after that, you know, and all that. But Konami, I don't know, they somehow produced their own chips. So it's mind-boggling to me. The only thing that's Nintendo on here is the MMC3 itself. That is a Nintendo proprietary chip that I guess Konami must have got from Nintendo. Nintendo produced that, but the rest of it completely made by Konami. So yeah, this is the only variant of a company doing this on the NES. You know, like all Capcom games, for instance, were all made by Nintendo. You know, all Jaleco or trying to think of other company now. IRIM, all third-party games, not just Nintendo games. They all were made by Nintendo, except for Konami. And why that is, I have no idea. So if anyone has any insights for why this was, or how Konami was somehow special, because in Japan, Konami had their own mappers that they were producing for the NES. Like here's the famous Akumajo Densetsu Castlevania 3 with its MMC or with its VRC6 sound chip. That's also its mapper that it's produced. This does not have an NES counterpart. The NES counterpart to this was done on Nintendo's own MMC5 board, which Nintendo produced for Konami, and then Konami did not produce any MMC5 boards themselves, probably because of the absurd cost, and Nintendo, that was Nintendo's own board type. It wasn't a very common thing. So where I was going with this was just to say that, in Japan, Konami had a big precedence for having these custom boards. They had, before the VRC6, they had the VRC1, the VRC2, the VRC4, and then the VRC6, and then VRC7 after that. These were all very custom things that no other company could produce, so Konami had to produce them themselves, because they didn't conform to design specs to any other board types. Why this carried over for board types that did already have counterparts? I mean, there's the Unrom boards made by Nintendo, and then there's the Unrom boards made by Konami. Maybe the fact that they were produced at exactly the same time, and Konami was like, well, we're already producing parts for Japan, so might as well make the Unrom board for America. But this didn't apply to Capcom, and it didn't apply to other major third-party companies that were producing games for the NES, and it didn't always apply to Konami either, because, like I said, you have your games that were made, such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game here. This is a massively popular game, and it was made by Konami, and it was put on a Nintendo board. So this was only a specialty thing, and I don't know why this happened. So it's just really interesting to me that this did happen, because Nintendo has such a stranglehold on the market back then. They were producing their own content. They had to have third-party companies submit their games to Nintendo for approval. That's how you got the Nintendo seal of quality on the games, and that really just meant that Nintendo had a monopoly on producing the games themselves. So that if a third-party game was getting so popular and selling so many copies, Nintendo could actually control the market by controlling the very supply of those cartridges themselves. It wasn't a third-party company that was producing them and then Nintendo was distributing them. Nintendo was producing them themselves. So, that's just something that's interesting part of history. This didn't really happen with any other system that I can think of. The Super Nintendo, it sort of happened at the beginning of the system's life, with, Konami and Capcom games also being made by Nintendo, but that was just a carryover from the NES days. And eventually it changed around, and, Nintendo boards were not always used for third-party games as they were in the NES era. So anyway, guys, that'll be it for my rambling this time. If you have any questions about this subject, feel free to leave them a comment in the comment section down below. Also, be sure to hit the like button, because hitting the like button helps support my channel and lets me know that you guys want to see more videos like this. So really, if you guys have any sort of behind-the-scenes information, like if you know if there's any, I don't know, programmers or ex-Konami employees or anything, I doubt it, but just in case, if anyone has any concrete information for why Konami produced their own TL-ROM boards and their own Unrom boards, and maybe they produced other boards that I'm just missing, because, I don't collect variants, it's not really something I do. The reason I have 2 copies of Silent Service here is simply because, I find the games for almost nothing, and I was like, well, okay, I'll pick them up, and even if the game is garbage or whatever, I'll take the PCB out and I'll put in a good game that has a cracked PCB, or a cracked case, I should say. Something like that. That's my rationality for owning 2 copies of Silent Service. even though Silent Service is a crappy game to begin with, so why do we even own one copy? Anyway, that's enough of my rambling. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you guys next time.